So going live will just take a moment. I think maybe we're live already now. Yes. So welcome this afternoon to our online macrobiotic summer conference 2022. And I'm here with Alex Jack and Danka Jack. And in a moment, we will welcome William Spear. But Alex, I'll let you take it away.
Okay, thank you, Bettina, and good afternoon once again to all of you who are attending this conference, and then to the many friends who are joining us for live stream. As Bettina said, my name is Alex Jack, and I'm the founder and the president of Planetary Health, which is the sponsor of this conference and a macrobiotic educational organization that has been working in many fields over the last 20 years. When Michio Kushi, the macrobiotic educator, passed away in 1914, we decided to honor him by creating the Michio Kushi Peace Prize. And every year since then, we have awarded the prize to an individual, or in some cases, two individuals, for their outstanding lifetime contribution to health, to peace, and sustainability. And the first recipient was Shizuko Yamamoto, who was a great macrobiotic teacher and counselor from Japan, who lived in New York for many, many years, and I think was a friend and teacher for many of us. And so she received the first award. The second award went, as I recall, to Dennis Kucinich, who was a congressman from Ohio, who had come to the Way to Health program at the Kushi Institute, where Bettina and myself and Edward Esco and many of our friends at that time were teaching. And he healed himself of Crohn's disease, as had Virginia Harper, who spoke in our previous session. And then he became the leading advocate for peace in the United States Congress for the next 10 years. And we worked with him very closely on a variety of projects. And then in the third year, as I recall, we awarded the Peace Prize to Neil Bernard, the pioneer doctor from Washington, D.C., founder of the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. And Neil spoke again just in our last session on world health and world peace. Then we honored Dr. Martha Cottrell the following year. Dr. Cottrell was the director of the medical services for the Fashion Institute in New York City. And she was director of the Macrobiotic AIDS Project and went to Africa with Michio and was highly involved for many years. She's still growing active today at 95 or 94 years old in Florida. And then following that, we honored Bill Terra, who again you just heard a few minutes ago, from London, still going strong at age 80, leading ecological projects in London and around the world. And as one of our participants said in the chat room, Bill, you've got to come home and run for president. He was so eloquent. And I would vote for him. I think many of you would too. Okay, and then the following year, Jane and Lino Stanchitz and were given the award. And they're a wonderful couple from North Carolina and have been active in macrobiotics for 40 and 50 years respectively. And Jane also just spoke and will be here later today. And then Michael Potter, the president of Eden Foods, was also one of our recipients. It's the pioneer and still the largest macrobiotic food company in the United States today. And then last year, Virginia Harper, who we just met in our last session, who also contributed, as well as Tom Monte, who is an author and most notable for writing Dr. Santalero's healing recovery story, recalled by life, received the Kushi Peace Prize. So this year we're very honored. We have two recipients. William Spear is one, and then Mina Dobic is the second. And Bill is here to join us, and we'll be giving an address, a keynote address, in honor of this occasion. Mina was planning to be here, but very sadly, her brother just passed away a few days ago. And so she notified us that she will not be able to participate. So I will turn the floor over to Bill in just a minute. And then, Bill, if we're scheduled to go, maybe you could have the floor, including Q&A, for about an hour, if that works for you. And then leave me about 20 minutes, and I will talk a little bit about Mina, her background, and then and because she can't be here, I'd like to read just a little section from her autobiography. So anyway, we're delighted to have Bill back again. He gave a fantastic talk last night, and people have been talking about it ever since. So, Bill, please.
Thank you, Alec. Thank you, Bettina. Thanks, everyone, for being here. Some of my friends from a larger community have joined, and I look forward to chatting with some of them, neighbors and friends in my own community. I think I'm receiving this prize today because the committee, whoever that is, basically kind of run out of options of people they know. That's probably not really true. There are plenty of people who are incredibly active in the peace movement. So I'm grateful to be here and to share some thoughts I have about gratitude, which is a title I chose for this talk. When many of us began to practice macrobiotics some 40 or 50 years ago, the Kushis and the Iharas were primarily teaching ways to recover our health through changes in diet and lifestyle. But for millennia before that, the Buddha nature was taught throughout traditional cultures. And that was something that addressed, first of all, in Buddhist teachings, physical problems, as much as macrobiotics first addressed those kinds of things. In Buddhist teachings, there were 84,000 antidotes for different kinds of problems that all sentient beings had, not just humans, but animals as well. And the Buddhas talked about all kinds of branches and categories and topics. There were 173 different topics of understanding our own ignorance and suffering and that of others. The Buddha, much like some of our teachers, knew logic and history, astrology, and they only taught those things that they thought would be beneficial, as did the Buddha, to relieve suffering. So as students of Buddhism know all too well, the first of these teachings were what are called the Four Noble Truths. I'm not going to mention those. It's easy enough for people to discover in their own study of Buddhism what those truths are. But after his own enlightenment, the Buddha left behind those kind of focuses on physical antidotes and began to teach what are called the 6 paramitas. Now, what those are kind of a means to move beyond our own suffering. Paramitas means a kind of beyondness. It's not exactly a real word, but they're the 6 beyondnesses. He also taught extensively on the 5 branches of sciences: technology, medicine, language, logic, and even wisdom. Macrobiotics became so much more focused on the first 4 aspects that many students independently began to seek out other disciplines to kind of try to figure out ways in which they could come in touch with a deeper wisdom. And so many of us were drawn to Buddhism and discovered additional ways of thinking to relieve suffering. We retained, I hope, the use of the magic spectacles of yin and yang and of the unifying principle, the unique principle that we learned at the very beginning. That basis, the unifying principle, is something that will never lose my vision. I will always be eternally grateful for having those principles. And even after the deaths of Osawas, the Iharas, the Kushis, we in the macrobiotic community have that as a precious gift. As a parallel, if you think about places where Buddhism was practiced, like Afghanistan, the community of elders there built 173 statues which were meant to represent each of the topics that the Buddha taught. Sadly, the Taliban destroyed nearly all of them. But what are remains there are hundreds of thousands of practitioners below the surface. I suspect that that's not unlike what remains in the macrobiotic community, where even though there's only 30 or 40 people here today, there are hundreds, if not thousands, who quietly practice what they learned from the Kushis, the Iharas, and from Osawa's teachings that help them maintain their health and use those principles as a guidance to live in the world. I once returned from a long trip in Europe where I had accompanied the Kushis. And when I was back in their home, Bucky Road, late at night, Michio went right to the kitchen and, as he often did, prepared soba, not just for himself, but for me as well. We sat together on the floor around the table. Many of you know that space. And after my meal, I felt overwhelmed with the feeling of happiness, even bliss. And I turned to Michio and said, I don't get it. I mean, if you eat well and you're plenty active and you stay physically busy, that's all there is, and you feel this happy, this blissful. And he looked at me and he smiled and he said, no, one more thing. You have to give it away. And it has to be useful. Then you can thank people. So today, my first piece of gratitude is to a previous speaker, to Ginny Harper, because what we gave away, my wife and I, when Gina lived with us in our home many years ago, she made useful and has changed so many lives. Thank you, Ginny. And thank you, others. I thought what might be useful today would be to look at what the Buddha taught later in his life about gratitude and what are the paramitas, which hopefully you can use if I give that away. It's not enough just to give a coat away until you find somebody on the street wearing your coat. And then you can actually go up to them and say, thank you for wearing my coat. That's why Michio used to stand in front of us and bow and thank us. And we'd say, no, thank you. And he would say, thank you, thank you, thank you. Because he knew that those to whom he was teaching would use that teaching themselves and possibly to help other people. We all have ego. We all have attachments to do the right thing or to be the best at what we do. We all feel a need to be acknowledged, to be loved. That's a very basic need of children and of adults. Yet, paradoxically, it's that very need, that attachment, that ego that causes our suffering. I remember clearly when Bill Tara asked me to consider something. years ago, maybe 40, Bill said to me, you know, people really like you. You're really popular. I said, yeah. He said, no, I mean, like, I don't know anybody who doesn't think you're a really good teacher. You're so popular, and the things you say, you have so many friends. Right? My ego got bigger. He said, yeah, people really, really like you. Everybody really likes you. And my head got bigger and bigger. And then he said, don't you think something's wrong with that? Thank you, Bill, for that many, many years ago. Yes, it burst me. It burst me open in my first of many challenges with my own ego and my own arrogance. What we find out in macrobiotics is the technology that we learn and the science that is studied so hard to prove so much of what we thought was helping people and now is being validated only temporarily relieves our suffering. The logic or medicine we use just helps us to realize our impermanence. I think this is one reason why the Buddha spent his life teaching the fifth science, which was to move beyond this world, to transcend. Yesterday, I spoke about making lemons from lemonade, and I shared the words on a small card I kept for so many years, one that had those words from one of Michio's lectures. He wrote, and I used to read, sometime in your life, go beyond yin and yang, go beyond macrobiotics, go beyond Michio Kushi and George Osawa, and live freely in the world. That, like what I want to share with you today, is what is known as transcendental wisdom, transcending the ordinary. Because sometimes we forget that many of the medicinal cures we apply are not really meant to use simply to regain our health or balance. Instead, because their origins come from the unifying principles of complementary antagonisms, they're meant as a kind of harmony of one, to make a merging of opposites into that which is beyond the sum of two parts. That's when, on a microcosmic level, inside our bodies and our bloodstream, something magical occurs. But eventually, what we're aiming for is between people, between us and others, and between us and all sentient beings. A harmony of opposites, so that the lion can sit down with a lamb, so to speak. Maybe so that students of the Iharas can break bread with those of the Kushis and get over this nonsense of right and wrong that is littered on the pages of macrobiotic communities' Facebook. Beyond the good and bad, beyond duality. Buddha taught 6 ways to move beyond this ordinary life. And they represent the 6 lines of the I Ching, the 6 stages of development, or the 6 going beyondnesses, the paramitas of our practice, macrobiotic practice, which we can bring to every client and patient or friend we meet in practically every situation. To consider the first one, we need to recall that people ourselves, many of us, love to develop material wealth. Right now, perhaps more than ever in our recent past, the economic challenges of what we're seeing out there for so many people are very, very real. The most frequent reason I encountered for people who sought me out for feng shui consultations was to find out, where is their wealth corner? How do I get more money? How can I make my business flourish? Very unfortunately, most people, me very often, have to look at their own sense of being greedy and this ego drive of a need to accumulate, to buy, to consume, which can never be satisfied. Maybe today, maybe every day, examine the nature of your own hunger. Does it disappear permanently when you buy something? No, it always returns, because it's very much a part of the cycle of cause and effect, and it's governed by the laws of karma. When people in society at every strata of economic income, whether very poor, living just at the threshold of the poverty line, or billionaires, are asked, how much more do you need? When is enough enough? The most common answer is just 15% more. Think of it, just 15% more, you could pay off that debt of your credit card. You could help a little bit more with that food bill, that cost of gas. You could put a little bit more in savings, just 15% more. And then when you get that, what happens is you want 15% more. So actually the first antidote, the first medicine, or the first paramita to consider in our daily life is the opposite of our generosity, rather our greed, and that is generosity. Maimonides, one of the teachers of Judaic culture, wrote the Code of Charity. This, similar to what Michio told me that night when we sat eating soba, give away and make it useful, climbing the ladder of charity until you reached an unattached state of unconditional being, of giving our lives away. I dare suspect Michio and many of the other macrobiotic teachers before him really gave their lives away, but nobody could see it. Nobody knew it. The second paramita, in our community, we really, more than others I've witnessed, are endlessly observing and are interested in how other people eat and live, how they act, what cars they drive, how much money they have, how they dress, their outward appearances. And so many people immerse themselves into the pages of magazines and hours of programming focused on this phenomenon. What's going on out there? We're galvanized to our television for the latest gossip or the latest news show, to know what happened to our heroes or our enemies or our opponents or our crushes even. Did he win the Oscar? What did she wear? Do you think he killed her? Did she really do it? Was he telling the truth? How did he die? What did he really say? How much did it cost? Wow. So much concern about what's going on out there. These times we're like ruled by gossip, even though it's clothed in dresses of concern. We're ruled by minds greedy to know. And sometimes we find ourselves delighted in negativity or scorn, a kind of sense of better than, distancing from others. I know I found myself there in that same place, comparison. And that phenomena creates a horrible destruction for me, a negativity for us. Our thoughts and ideas become obscured, right? And our true nature of loving kindness and compassion for each other gets shelved. So therein, in the second way, the second paramita that fits so well, I think, in the macrobiotic community is discipline. Buddha called the second paramita the way of transcendental beyondness, discipline. It's a commitment to recognizing the strangest of all paradoxes, especially for macrobiotics, that only through discipline in the physical realm can we gain freedom and come ultimately to see what the Buddhists call samsara, the world of illusion, of maya, of impermanence. Discipline in macrobiotics in our daily life includes any and every practice of selfless service for its own sake, for relieving anger or contempt at all the current events that make us angry, with a recognition that there's nothing to change in this world but ourselves. There's nothing going on out there which won't change if we change our minds and our perceptions. Discipline dissolves negativity. It shatters the meaningless chatter that fills the pages of Facebook. And it's through discipline in our practice that we can restore balance, peace, and harmony and rhythm within our own hearts and within our relationships. The third paramita reminds me that George Osawa used to say, give away what is most important to you. He wasn't referring to a thing, but rather to that which you already have so little of and you wish you had more of, something that's important. It's strange because when you give away a thing that you have a lot of, you just have less things. If you have $100 and you give away 50, you just have 50. If you have 10 books and you give away 5, you just have 5 books. No, he was talking about non-things. Give away that which is most important to you. Who among us is not ruled in some way by time? We just don't have enough. Enough for our children, for our friends, enough to do the laundry, to take care of our life. Are we mechanical in our daily lives with time? Oh, it's noon, must be time for lunch, we say. Under the pressures and memory of our learned behaviors, we still attach ourselves to the judgment of right and wrong. What time to do something, forgetting that we're not walking in anyone else's shoes, and we have no need to attach ourselves to a clock which ignores our inner wisdom of circadian rhythm. We're not walking on any other path but our own, because the sicknesses that we really seek to overcome are our own intolerance, my own arrogance, my sense of separation, merely an illusion of thinking that I know what's best for another person. As teachers and counselors in macrobiotics, that's a grave responsibility. So to achieve some sense of equanimity, an antidote is needed, a kind of check and balance of our own ego. It implores us to be magnanimous, to extend ourselves in a way, a bigger way to others. We need only to be kind and listen. So the antidote, the paramita, is patience. Know that our brothers and sisters, the kings and queens, the senators and mayors, actually all suffer in their own ways. Like Dylan said, even the President of the United States has to sit naked that no one is free from the wheel of karma, and that, like us, each sentient being will suffer. And so while we keep busy with our own schedule, our own busy lives, we can remember what Michio used to always end his lectures with. Let us help each other, support each other, he'd say. And so the paramita is let us honor each other with an unconditional presence, patient listening, bringing more of our own open hearts into every part of our lives through being and not just doing, through a presence in a journey without a focus of the goal. Because in that presence, there's only our next breath. That's all that's certain. And we might just die with that next breath. The fourth paramita reminds me of my laziness. Laziness is evident in virtually all of our lives. It's only recently when I finally began getting out of bed when I wake up. Most mornings now it's at 5 or 5:30. Before that, I'd lay around doing nothing. I was a vegetable or a couch potato. While some of us are likely not to be labeled lazy, most of us will still readily admit that we have some personal shortcomings. I know I've got many of them. How often I've considered my to-do list, for example, knowing that there'll be more on that undone than done, more to do tomorrow that I just couldn't finish today. Laziness causes us to look for perfect parking places in front of the store instead of the open one 100 yards away. Laziness causes me to try to skip to the head of the long line at security, or to buy books with titles like Feng Shui for Dummies or Feng Shui Made Easy, to buy Cliff Notes instead of reading Hamlet, or to get an account with Blinkist so we can read a book summary in 15 minutes. Laziness writes instant messages instead of personal notes, or we buy polyester that's quick drying instead of cotton that we might have to iron. Laziness has us making quick oats and quick brown rice instead of whole grains that take more time. You know, the whole grains that have been on the planet for thousands of years as principal foods. Laziness makes people buy microwaves, believing falsely that they'd save time. And laziness is what caused us to spend our health making money, only to find out later in life that we have to spend our money trying to make us healthy again. And laziness buys lottery tickets. The only antidote I know of for laziness is effort. There's simply no shortcuts. We have to grind the sesame seeds to make great gamashio. The good stuff doesn't come in a jar. And when brown rice needs to be cooked for 45 minutes, it needs to be cooked for 45 minutes. Through the basic spiritual laws of process, we understand the need to move through life's challenges occurs step by step. And every step becomes a foothold for the next one, gaining a deeper appreciation for what's necessary on the personal path, and therefore what our clients and friends and children must do in their own individual life. The fourth paramita then, that thing of beyondness, has no shortcut, no cure quickly. no greater megahertz in our internal computer drive of processing speed. That antidote means we have to practice our handstands, as I told my son, before you can get the Olympic gold. We have to practice enough to master our scales, as my wife, who plays the piano, knew all too well before she could tackle Rachmaninoff's second piano concerto. And we have to chew each mouthful 50 times before healing our digestive system. There's just no shortcut. And using the I Ching a few times rarely helps. We have to study it because there are 11,520 possible responses. While we search for the deepest wisdom there's no escaping if we just pick it up now and then. Yeah, the fourth paramita, to get over our laziness, effort. And fifth, still, we all suffer from the appearance of separateness, from the illusion of separate minds. We have little to defend against the cacophony of external life in our monkey minds and its myriad manifestations that talk and talk. We classify things by age and gender and sexual preference that change in lifetimes. And the analysts and the Googles and the Facebooks and the cookies are collecting data so they can categorize our reasons for buying things and the ways in which we vote, the ways we do what we do. And sure, there are real differences. That's what makes up this consumer mentality, this capitalist system of function. But that's only what's happening on the surface. Because you know what? At the end of the day, we're all in this together, regardless of how we vote, or what car we drive, what foods we buy at the market, or who we love. The fifth antidote, the fifth paramita, then is the response to a sense of illusion of separateness. And the fifth paramita is self-reflection and meditation. Through at least some sense of a daily practice of meditation or prayer or concentration on the divine interconnectedness of life, we can, like Alanis Morissette says in her song, remember our divinity. We can begin to recognize the weave of life and recall what we share, the tantra of energies that exists in this lifetime and all that came before. We can, with simple elegance and a kind of determined mindfulness, return ourselves to the harmony of one, the unifying principle which embraces a reality that there's only one of us here. The sixth great burden, as our teachers have reminded us over and over again, is that of ignorance, of not knowing. How can we embrace this strange kind of alien truth after years and years spent in seminars, conferences in schools and universities, dozens of notebooks later and thousands of cookbooks read and followed? How, I ask myself, can I admit in the end, I really don't know? How humbling to walk with this, how utterly stupefying as life overwhelms us, how totally naked and honest and genuine and authentic can it be? Did we forget that Georgia Sowell's school was called Maison Ignoramus, the house of ignorance? Did we forget non credo. The sixth antidote in macrobiotics, the sixth antidote really of the paramita that Buddha taught is wisdom itself. But it's not the wisdom one must seek out there, outside of us, not some new language or the latest body hack or advanced technique or skill, but rather it's the wisdom of embracing our true nature inside of us, the wisdom which is beyond time and space, beyond life and death, beyond cause and effect. And what is that? It's the wisdom of emptiness. It's again what Alana sang at the end of her song when she said, "Thank you, nothingness." The purity of purpose in all of what we do, to simply be a vessel, a conduit for what we don't know. All of us here can open to that possibility even after these years of filling notebooks with the learned observations of our teachers. Make no mistake, I'm so very grateful for those years, for my teachers, for my ancestors and friends who've been so supportive and inspiring along the way. And I'm also thankful for those who challenged me, my adversaries, my enemies, and even the haters, because they too taught me. Every one of us sitting in meditation, every one of us can return to a sense of emptiness and be wise and truly align ourselves with what in feng shui are called the currents of the cosmic breath, with the nameless Tao that we used to hum and chant with the sound of Su or Om. Align ourselves beyond macrobiotics, beyond yin and yang, beyond the Kushis and the Iharas and George Osawa, and live freely in the world. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your work in this world. Thank you to Alec and Bettina for your selfless service, and to others for whatever you may be doing to make a difference, for whatever you can do to relieve suffering. And thank you from my heart for this opportunity to spend time with you, as I thank my family, my wife, my 3 sons, and my daughter. I wish you the most fortunate blessings with my deepest gratitude.
Thank you, William. That was just really, really wonderful. Very, you know, right for the times to think about what is within and bring that out to the world. And that is where our access is, not out there. Thank you. Alex.
Thank you, Bill. It was magnificent. I think it was not only for the times, but for the all times, perhaps, or beyond time and space. Anyway, it was great.
Thank you.
All right, so for the next award, as I explained earlier, unfortunately, Mina Dobic cannot be with us. I have her photograph here, and I'd like to just say a few words, a little bit about Mina for those of you who don't know her, and read an excerpt from her books. But let me share the screen. Where is it? Hmm. Yeah. Okay. Can you see her picture?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. Okay, just a little bit about Mina's background. As a top academician in Yugoslavia, her home country, Milenka Mina Dobic led a privileged life. After receiving her PhD, she served as a professor of linguistics and world literature and director of the art and education program for Radio Indigia, Radio Belgrade, and Radio Novi Sad for 11 years. In 1986, she received the recipient of Truth Award, her country's highest journalism award, for the 90-minute documentary she produced entitled The Survivors of the Holocaust. That all changed in 1987 when Mina was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer that had metastasized to her liver, bones, and lymph system. Her doctors gave her only 2 months to live. She reviewed the literature and quickly realized that the chemo and radiation treatments offered by her physicians were not a viable option. Instead, she did something remarkable. She decided to adopt the macrobiotic way of life. The following year, 1988, with her husband Bashko and 2 small children, Shurjin and Yelena, she came to the United States to live and to volunteer at the Kushi Institute. After healing herself of ovarian cancer, Mina completed the leadership training program and became a teacher and dietary counselor. Moving to Southern California with her family, she went on to become an internationally acclaimed educator. Her story was told in Vogue, on PBS TV, and in numerous other magazines, radio, and television programs in the United States, Europe, and in Japan. In Hollywood, Mina organized the first macrobiotic support group for cancer survivors. She coordinated and led the quarterly macrobiotic seminars for executive chefs at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel. Her autobiography, My Beautiful Life, was published by Findhorn Press in 2000 and translated from English into Serbian, Czech, and Hungarian. A film version was made of her story entitled With Love, Mina. And in 2005, she went on a European tour with Michio Kushi to Budapest, Belgrade, Novi Sad, and Montenegro, and gave lectures, seminars, and trained executive chefs at leading hotels. In California, her clients included many well-known Hollywood celebrities such as Tom Cruise, Nicole Kidman, Madonna, Guy Ritchie, Gwyneth Paltrow, Blythe Donner, Alicia Silverstone, Steven Seagal, Rachel Weisz, and Vanessa Marcel. Over the last 30 years, Mina has helped thousands of people recover their health and tirelessly spread the macrobiotic way of life around the world. On a personal note, I first met Mina and her family in 1988 at the Kushi Institute, where she came to heal, and where I was serving as the general manager at that time. Strict immigration laws barred us from employing them, but Michio and Aveline, who had faced many immigration struggles of their own over the years, helped find a way around these regulations so they could stay. Mina and Bashko were tireless workers and promoters, and soon about a third to half of the people coming to our residential or Way to Health program were patients from Yugoslavia. They flew over to Logan Airport. Boschko would meet them, drive them to the Berkshires, 3-hour drive. And then they would stay for the week and learn cooking and take theory classes, and then go home. And many of them recovered. Here in the Berkshires, the Dobiches ultimately rented a house about a mile from the Institute. In fact, it's the same house that I am now living in today. So their energy is always with us. After completing her studies, Mina and her family faced a further quandary. The civil war in Yugoslavia was raging, and they did not want to take their young children back to a war-torn country. Their visas had expired, and so, like many people in their situation, as I recall, they went underground and eventually surfaced in California before eventually receiving refugee status because of the war. Like so many immigrants, including the Kushis, the Dobic family story is heartwarming and shows the tremendous perseverance of human beings in the face of an unfeeling bureaucracy and their ability to maintain an unwavering dedication to a larger dream. So it is a great honor to award the Michio Kushi Peace Prize to Mina and her family for their outstanding dedication and contribution to health, peace, and sustainability. Okay, I'd now like to read just a few pages from Mina's very inspiring story, My Beautiful Life. And this chapter tells how she first met Michio Kushi. February 22nd, 1987, we had scheduled a consultation with Michio. He's the founder of the East-West Foundation and the acknowledged leader of the international macrobiotic community and natural food movement. A renowned healer, he teaches people how to overcome their illness with a special dietary approach and lifestyle change. I met him first through macrobiotic books and literature. Some of our friends thought of him as, quote, that strange Japanese man who thinks food can cure cancer, unquote. But everything he said made perfect sense to me. It was logical and clear to live in harmony with nature's law. I'd lived that way as a child, but had forgotten the wisdom. On our way to the consultation, we guessed how Mr. Kushi would look. Boschko, my husband, was sure of his vision. You will see, he said, he's a little shorter than me, round face and small eyes like a fish. But like all Japanese people, his hair is black and perfectly combed. He will be dressed professionally wearing a suit and tie, unquote. My guess was not too different, except I thought he was taller, had a high forehead, and was slender and elegant. Sika and Dragomir, our translators, were waiting for us in the lobby of the Kushi Institute. Dragomir told me he was going to transcribe as well as translate for us. After 15 minutes, the receptionist advised us that Michio would see us. When we walked into the room, it reminded me of a classroom. Mr. Kushi was there alone, a refined gentleman, slim, tall, dressed in a smart, dark blue suit. The color suited him well. His warm smile welcomed us as he reached out to shake our hands. He didn't look anything like we had imagined. I will always remember the way his spirituality dominated his physical form. He radiated a calmness, and his peaceful spirit filled the room. His gracious manner immediately put us at ease and satisfied our need for contentment and peace. Instinctively, we knew he possessed extraordinary healing power. Suddenly, every cell in my body felt energized. This humble and mild-spirited man had already dispelled all doubts and fear. In one fleeting moment, I believed his assurance that my hope was well placed. Looking directly into my eyes, he said simply, "In 1 year, you can get well if you do what you learn here." Then he turned to Boshko and said with an equal amount of conviction, "Yugoslav people have very strong constitution." That was his first verbal contact with us. Boshko, under the influence of Mr. Kushi's dynamic presence, agreed without hesitation. "Yes, we are very strong people." The next question was directed to me. "How do you feel now, Mina?" My answer came unhesitatingly. "Very, very happy, Mr. Kushi." The smile on his face told me he already knew the answer before he asked the question. "Then please tell me about your illness," he said. Chronologically, I related everything that had happened since January 1987, the previous year when I was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer. He listened quietly, not interrupting my testimony. Even the translator's fluid translation left that intimate moment undisturbed. "Good," he said after hearing my story. "Please take coat off. And your watch, please, and your necklace. Please do not wear them." He took my pulse, touched my palms, examined my shoulders and spine. He looked into my eyes, at my tongue, and he checked my feet. "Very good," he said. "It will be very difficult, but in 1 year, you will be well." I glanced at Boshko. Tears strained his eyes. I felt like hugging Mr. Kushi for that kind way he told me. It sounded reasonable and simple. Truth was staring me in the face. Instead, I hugged Boshko. "Let's design your diet and then talk about new way of life." His words sounded like, "Let's dance, let's play, let's have fun as you journey on the river of life." Now it was our turn to listen, and listen we did for an hour and a half. The new diet was prescribed. It sounded like a no-no diet. Avoid this, avoid that. He recited my blacklist. No more meat, chicken, dairy products, eggs, sugar, tropical fruit, raw fruit, artificial sweeteners, coffee, alcohol, soft drinks, food colors, canned food, raw vegetables. No nightshade vegetables, tomato, potato, eggplant, bell peppers, no high potassium vegetables with oxalic acid, such as spinach. There went my delicious traditional Yugoslavian cuisine. My daily diet consisted of 50% whole grains, 5% protein, 5% seaweed, 25 to 35% vegetables, miso soup once a day, 2% pickles, every 10 days, a half cup of cooked fruit. For daily seasoning, I could use a half teaspoon of miso. I could also use 1 teaspoon of shoyu in 1 dish per meal. Small medicinal pickled umeboshi plum was recommended 4 times a week. 4 times a week, I could have pressed salad and 1 teaspoon of vinegar from the plums. In my case, sea salt was prohibited entirely for 4 months. Grains were to be cooked with kombu seaweed, and a half teaspoon of gomashio was to be sprinkled over cooked grains. Anyway, she goes on for the next page and a half, going a little bit further into the dietary recommendations. When it came to medicinal drinks, she goes on, carrot daikon drink was to be taken every other day for 2 months. This drink helps dissolve solidified fat deposits existing deep within the body. We don't have daikon radish in our country. I wondered, if I buy fresh daikon radish here, how long will it stay fresh? Daikon will last 2 weeks, he said. You can't find it, use black radish. I think it's common in your country. It has similar medicinal effect. I'll buy some seeds and grow them in my garden, I promised. Very good, Mr. Kushi seemed pleased. Okay, then they go on to a few more remedies. And then some more lifestyle, way to life recommendations I think that we're all familiar with. Mr. Kushi didn't spend so much time talking about the philosophical aspects of macrobiotics. I wonder, did he sense our commitment and dedication? I knew then what he already knew. I would follow his instructions unerringly. Everything fell into place as it was meant to be after that. I was ready, Boschko was ready. Mr. Kushi had reawakened our natural, inherent healing consciousness. How had we lost our compass for natural living? How did we lose our roots? Look, we just found them again. That's why our teacher's suggestion to sing a happy song every day did not sound so silly to us. I couldn't remember the last time I sang a happy song. What defies explanation is that for the last 11 years, the monitor control in my office at the radio station had been piping in music every day. And come to think of it, I could not remember the words to even a single song. How could that possibly be? It sounded like my life up until then was a tragedy, interspersed with a picnic here and there. From now on, I intended to live a better quality life and to silence death that was mocking me in the face. Does that sound like the phoenix in Egyptian mythology? It's the story of a beautiful lone bird that lives in the Arabian desert for 600 years. It sets itself on fire only to arise anew from the ashes to start another long life, a symbol of immortality. As the translator was consulting with Mr. Kushi, I shared this thought with Boschko. Doesn't my life sound like the story of the mythological phoenix? My lips tenderly touched his cheek. Wow, how wondrous that someone so sick could feel so content. Drawing me closer, Boschko playfully whispered in my ear, "Don't worry, honey, I will watch you very carefully so you won't burn your wings." See you next year, we said to Mr. Kushi. I knew then that I would live to do just that. He wished us all the best and a safe trip home. Leaving the Kushi Institute, hope and faith took charge of my healing. Emerging from the subway in Boston, I triumphantly reminded Boschko, today is exactly 1 month since my doctor's prognosis of 2 months to live. I feel better than ever. I feel fantastic. No pain in my body. I sleep well. My appetite is excellent. My happiness transcends all understanding. How could cancer possibly survive in my body? Boschko was thrilled with my new perspective. From now on, he said, let's not even use the word cancer. Let's adopt Mr. Kushi's term, condition. Raising my arms skyward and lifting my head with an expression of thanks, I exclaimed, I love my life. My life is like the phoenix. Anyway, very beautiful story. And I think that invokes certainly Michio's spirit, of course, Aveline's spirit as well.
Wow.
After whom our award is made in their honor.
Alex, Bill is also still here. William is still here too. He's willing to answer questions if there are questions or comments.
Sure.
So if anybody has questions, comments, feel free to unmute yourself and let us know.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
I can't remember in which number it was of the things that you went over, but you said we have nothing to change outside, but we only have ourself to change. Can you say more about that? Because there's so much going on right now that one feels like one should try to change it, and yet there really isn't very much we can do. And just the more I'd just love to hear what you would say about that.
Sure. Thank you for that. That's a very important point because it highlights a kind of sense which you've just confessed to in so many ways of helplessness and hopelessness about the present situation. And that's a horrible feeling that none of us would want to have. The perception that we have can be very precisely expressed and defined by the two very different schools of thought from ancient China, Confucianism and Taoism. And there's an old story about Confucius finally being convinced by his students to go see Lao Tzu, who was the keeper of the archives. They both lived in the Zhou dynasty at the same time. They were contemporaries in the 4th century BC. And when Confucius came out, they asked him, what did he say? What was it like? And he basically said to his students, or so it is written, that Lao Tzu was like a flying dragon. That he said to Confucius, don't you believe in the perfection of the world? Why do we have to change things? And everything is exactly as it should be. So I often ask students in classes, how many of you think that the world is perfect just the way it is, that everything is exactly as it should be? And almost no one raises their hands. And then I ask, well, how many of you would like to change things and make things different? And almost everyone raises their hands. So my thought is this, that you can be both Confucian and Taoist, but you have to get them in the right order. You have to be willing to say everything is perfect the way it is, as hard as that is, because it is the way it is. It's not different than the way it is. It is the way it is. And the way it is perfect the way it is. And we want to change it. So the purpose of that paramita is so that we can accept the way it is and change ourselves so that our perception of the world accepts the way it is. That doesn't mean that we don't work to change it and make it better. But you have to start with accepting it the way it is, because it's perfect the way it is. We might not like the way it is, but that's a whole different story. It is the way it is. It's not different. And so we can actually take it on a personal level. Your parents were the way they were. They weren't different than the way they were. You might not have liked the way they were, but that's another story. And you might want to change the way they are. But the first thing you have to do is accept the way it is. And so when you look back at how your parents were, I know two things about your parents that are absolutely true without ever having known your parents. The first is they gave you your life. That's 100% true. They gave you your life. And the second is they did the best they could. They didn't do it differently. They didn't do it better. They didn't do it worse. They did it the way they did it. And you might not have liked the way they did it, but that's a different story. So the Taoist way of relating the Buddhist paramita is change your perception, change the way you think it should have been different to accepting the way it is. 100% embracing that everybody's doing the best they can because they're not doing it differently than the way they're doing it. You might want them to do it different, but that's a whole other story. They're doing it the way they're doing it. I don't like a lot of the ways that people are doing what they're doing. And I think we could all kind of make a list of the ways we see things happening that we don't like the way they're doing it. But the way they're doing it is the way they're doing it. And so if we change our perception and accept that the way they're doing it is perfect for the now, then that Taoist principle sits at accepting the world the way it is and then trying to change it to make a difference. That's Confucianism.
Yeah,
Those are the two schools of thought.
that makes a lot of sense.
Good. Good question. Thanks.
Oh, well, this is going to be very controversial, William Spear, but I remember the story you told about the fellow that came and said, everybody likes you. You're so popular. Everybody likes you. Something wrong with that? Well, I can't say that I don't like you. Having a hard time listening to you, and I can't figure out why. I maybe your cadence, because I'm a little hyped up, probably eating things I shouldn't, but I'm like, okay, and then so anyway, I would probably love you in person, but I'm like, ah. And I think you said something about laziness, which is like you're speaking of the woman I love. You know, I mean, what do you mean lazy? I do resemble that remark, and the one amazing thing that happened to me, I had a counselor as a child in an otherwise sort of dysfunctional world who was from Vienna and had studied with Alfred Adler, colleague of Freud. And all of that is to say, she helped me to see the world with a different perspective. And I'm not looking for a comment on this, but she did make me understand the importance of contribution. And of course, that's what we're honoring you for today. And thank you. Thank you for things I don't understand, and thank you. I just want to say it sort of more relates to Mina's story. She led a privileged life, and then she went to see Michio Kushi when she found out she had ovarian cancer. I too had a cancer, and in 2005 I went to Kushi Institute, and Michio wasn't there. So I missed that lovely moment when everything kind of gets back. But I hung in there with the belief that food and love and my beliefs in a higher power, whatever you want to say, can help. And well, the years went by and I was fine, and I still believe all of that. But I think modern medicine is quite a siren, and if things happen that you can't seem to control, it's very difficult not to reach out. You know, in my quest, I was a Christian Scientist at one point. I'm not sure if I'm in the right. This is beyond the purview of this conversation, but I'll finish anyway. In my quest, no, I forgot what I was going to say. I have met so many wonderful medical people. I mean, I was a Christian Scientist, and there's a story there. I didn't deal with medicine the way people, but now because I had to, there's a lot of well-meaning people out there. I mean, I give you Neil Barnhart. I mean, these people with love in their hearts. So I don't know. I really hope that we can get a rapprochement, to use that nice French word, of minds, because these are terrific minds out there. And I want to say, because I've gone through, the cancer returned, I've gone through this as a skeptic, they really contradict each other. And I try to be generous, but it's an inexact art, medicine, you know, so it's good to know that, you know, we are all searching on this plane. Deepak Chopra said, science is the best we got right now, but it's not really all it. So I'm sure he did not say it that way. So I didn't overstep the purpose, but thank you for your service, and also Mino. I hope I say her name right. Okay, thank you. I still don't like you.
Thanks. That's great. Let me comment, if I may, on one aspect of what you said, and that is that there's so many great people out there and so many different viewpoints, right? And bringing them together, mentioning Neil, Bernard, and Deepak and others. I've had the opportunity to be in front of many great spiritual teachers who were full of love, many gurus who were full of wisdom, and many scholars who were full of extraordinary knowledge. And being in the presence of those people, right, having a lot to take away. And I also had the opportunity to sit for 10 days at a time, twice in my life, with His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. And at one point I sat about 20 feet from him, and I got to look in his eyes. And you know what the Dalai Lama is full of? Nothing. And when you look in the eyes of someone who's full of nothing, you really find out really quickly what you're full of. An enormous mirror. The Dalai Lama carries nothingness, carries emptiness. That's the last paramita.
Okay. And paramita, I must have tuned out. You mean parameter? Is that the same use of the word?
No, it's not at all.
Oh.
It's called the paramita, Paramita. It's a Buddhist teaching which roughly translates to mean a beyondness. It's a transcendental wisdom of beyond the ordinary.
You know, it's just the opposite of perimeter.
There's
Very
no
good.
relation other than the similarity of the sound of letters, but there's no relation to perimeter.
Gotcha. Thank you so much. Thank you. I hope
Thank
I
you.
wasn't rude.
No, not at all. Thank you.
We have two people who raised their hands. Let's start
So,
Denora.
Yes,
Mhm.
hello. Thank you so much for the inspiring. I mean, you're talented, and I'm sure you experienced. So the question is, how do you speak? I mean, how do you talk to people you teach macrobiotics or other things with the expectation they will not change? And how you can do that and still project love and trust that what you're doing is going to leave a great impact, and hoping for that.
Well, I think the trap there, with all due respect, is expectation, right? Surely, as a physician, you've given recommendations so many times that no one follows, right? People walk out of your office and been given a prescription they may not have fulfilled, or told to not use so much salt to bring down their blood pressure, or whatever you may have said. You do the best you can. You make it possible. You know, my sister said something once to me, which was kind of interesting, about helping hyperactive children. She works a great deal with children who have had differences and resources that help them with developmental delays. And she noticed, of course, children who were hyper because of the sugar they were eating, and they were being brought to her as a consultant after a breakfast of Pepsi Cola or highly sweetened sugars, and bouncing all over the place with the parents who were trying to figure out why their kids were hyperactive. Rather than saying to them, you know, you should take your children off sugar, she would say, you know, some people have a theory that sugar might have a relationship to, and she kind of puts it out there as if people could discover, right? Michio frequently said the words, please discover, right? Please find out, right? In a way, it was kind of him saying, if you believe me, you're foolish, right? But if you don't try to see if I'm right, to experiment, you're probably more foolish. So I leave people with challenges like, uh, why don't you give up dairy food for 1 month? Just, you're not going to die. You're not going to have like a terrible crisis. Just start there. Just no dairy food, no yogurt, no sour cream, no butter, no milk. You'll be fine. You might crave it, but stop. And then at the end of a month, sit down and have a grilled cheese sandwich. See what that does. See how you feel. If you like that, then maybe that's food for you. But 9 times out of 10, if people give up dairy and then go back and have dairy, they find out what it does to their throat, to their voice, to their sleep, to their bowel movements, to their menstrual cramps, to their skin, to their hair, to their eyes, to everything. So you can kind of put out some challenges rather than some bigger recommendations as possibilities of please discover. But I still don't know everybody's truth. I don't know anybody else's truth. And so as a physician, you and counselors, we just do the best we can to make recommendations to hopefully encourage them to experiment and try, especially when they're facing grave difficulties. Good
Thank you.
question. Thanks.
Maya,
Looks like Maya. Yeah.
Can I be heard?
Yes, you can.
Thank you. Yesterday, you gave an example with your patient from the Holocaust when you said when you wanted to tell him about his denial, and the lady said to you, "You don't have the right to tell them about that." Can you elaborate more on that? When we are in a business of awakening people, sharing the message, and how, you know, more on that?
Yes. Yeah, I understand. For those of you who weren't there, basically the message was that we do not have a right to take someone out of denial. Right? And that fits especially in the process of a kind of psychological or spiritual dimension. If certain people are focused and attached to a way of seeing the world, right, then that's their way unless they discover proof to the opposite side. I had a dinner recently that I attended with a group of neuroscientists, and among those people present were some journalists, and sitting with an acupuncturist who's a dear friend. She was talking with this journalist from a very well-known magazine and paper, and he asked her, "What do you do?" And she said, "Well, I'm a doctor of Chinese medicine and I practice acupuncture." And he said, "Oh, that's all nonsense. That doesn't help anybody." This was a woman who was long time study practice of traditional Chinese medicine and acupuncture. And the shocking part was that he was a science writer and journalist from one of the world's leading newspapers. But that was his perspective. So she couldn't say to him, "Well, you're wrong," because he already had his mind made up. But what instead she said is, "I'd love to have a conversation with you about that because maybe you haven't seen some of the research. Maybe you've just been looking at a different direction about some of the science," right? So back to your question, it doesn't do us any good when we try to change people's behavior through a kind of perpetration and shaking our finger saying you're wrong, right? And especially to open them up in a way that shatters the protection they may have not to address something, right? Which was the case for that man on the mat who didn't want to talk about his experience in the Holocaust or his relationship to his father. He used that as protection, his own armor to survive. And it wasn't my purpose or my point or my right to tell him, no, you should look at that. He was in denial about the affect that his father had on his life. Right? And my teacher basically said, I don't have a right to take him out of that denial. I do not have a right to take that protection away from him. Right? So we don't have a right to tell people the way to behave unless they're harming other people, in which case, like our children, we have to say, I can't let you do that. Right? And so in society, we have to make a lot of noise, as Bill encouraged us, and we all know, we have to make a lot of noise against people who are polluting the world with chemical, right? Or who are harming sentient beings, right? Or who are doing things which hurt nature, which work against the order of the universe. Yes, right? We have to make some noise. But that's a kind of different, that's a kind of activism that isn't taking people out of denial. That's trying to fight for our own survival and the survival of sentient beings. Something very, very different. Thanks, Maya. That's a great question, too. It's like Patricia has a hand up, huh? Yeah.
I do.
Hi.
Hi, Bill. I wanted to ask you if you have some current projects that you're working on with your foundation or personally, maybe with children. What's new?
Thanks for that. Yeah, it's funny because Alec asked me for a very long bio, and I wrote this kind of thing of all of what I did and what's going on now. And then today, when he introduced me, just said, "Okay, so here's Bill. Everybody knows Bill," and then I got that. It's like, okay, Alex, well, have fun with that long bio I sent you. Right now, there's a team, one woman, Gina De La Chesney, who's in Uganda, working with families in the slums there, teaching children how to handle the horrific conditions of what's going on the ground in sub-Saharan Africa. We're also doing programs on care for the caregivers in 7 regional hospitals, especially for frontline COVID workers, emergency room technicians, and the surgeon, resident surgical team who are dressing in PPE and masking up every day, dealing with emergency cases of COVID. We run a program through a consortium at HMO called Nuvance. COVID shut us down, as you can well imagine, from playing with kids outside. And so it's really hard to do things on the web per se, but separately, I've also been working in 2 other ways. One with brainmind.org, a consortium of cohorts of neuroscientists where we've been teaching neuroscientists Qigong and meditation practices and Douyin. 200 of them in a room at Stanford and MIT, jumping up and down and pounding their bodies in Douyin. It was pretty incredible. And we'll continue that. I had a dinner with 8 of the board members a couple of weeks ago in New York City, which was really a pleasure to kind of plan more of that work with neuroscience community. And the second thing is really one of the most important and significant parts of my own activism, and that is that I joined the board of Madre. Madre.org is an extraordinary women's human rights organization of 35, 36, 37 years now in existence. Really below the surface. People don't know it exists much. I was a supporter for a long time before I joined the board. We trained many of their staff after they came back from the Middle East, and they were working with women who had been sex trafficked. They had so much vicarious and secondary traumas that they needed some work in terms of their own caregiving. And after years of working with them and supporting them, I went to the board and I said, do you have to be a woman to serve on your board? So I became the first man on the board in 35 years to join Madre's board. There's now 2 other men on the board since then. When I joined, there were, I think, 7 or 8 people on the board. Now it's up to about 14. Madre recently received a donation of $15 million from a wonderful, wonderful philanthropist, Mackenzie Scott. So she recognized Madre as being an extraordinary global organization for women's human rights. So I encourage you to look at what Madre does. I'd love you or anyone to support their work or to join their work. Fortunate Blessings itself is kind of on a hiatus until we get to go back in the world and play, but I'll start to write much more. I just finished a book, and hopefully that'll come out a little bit more about ways in which we see the world. And more of the work with Nuvance and the 7 hospitals, and possibly more work in Uganda and sub-Saharan Africa. Thanks for your question.
That's amazing. So much good work. And have you written other books before this one?
Well, as many of you know, I wrote Feng Shui Made Easy, which was kind of a wild experience to actually see what happened. I tried to run away from the acquisitions editor for years in London with HarperCollins because I was convinced that it would just go down in history as being an arrogant piece of nonsense, because teachers, those who teach don't know, and those who know don't teach. And so to write, I thought, I'm not going to commit myself to paper. And finally, after she chased me down for a couple of years, I called Anne-Marie Coleman, who's a good friend, and asked her what she thought. And she said, well, you only need 3 things. You need a good publisher, you need a good editor, and you need a good cover. And go for it. So I wrote Feng Shui Made Easy. Little did I know. There's a 6th book on the subject of Feng Shui, sold out in 10 days. It's in 16 languages. It's in its 24th printing. It sure opened a lot of doors, and it gave me an opportunity to reach a lot of people and introduce macrobiotics. But it's really Feng Shui based on the unifying principle by any other name. So that was the first book. And I wrote another one which never got published, but the 3rd one I worked on for 8 years. I finished it a couple of weeks ago. And I'm waiting to see what happens with it, an agent, and possibly it'll be published soon.
Well, we hope it will be. I'm sure.
Thank you.
I'll wish you well with it. Thank you
Thanks.
so much for being here and for all that you're doing in the world. It's wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Thank you, Bill, for your wonderful presentation. We're looking forward to your new book and seeing you again on some of our other future activities, for sure.
Thanks a lot.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
So Bettina, we're going to take about a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back. I think the members of the skit have to get change clothing or skits or.
So let's take about a 10-minute break, and we will be back by 4:30. And thank you, everybody. We will end the live stream. Be well, and perhaps look forward to another online macrobiotic winter or summer conference and seeing you there. Take care. Bye-bye.
Don't forget to unrecord.
Goodbye.